Hello, everybody, and welcome to this wonderful MyTAC talk. We have Professor Jennifer Gregg here, the Chair of Communication for the University of Massachusetts in Boston, President of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail, and she will be taking us on a wonderful and wild tour of women's history in Boston. So thank you for being here, Jennifer, and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me. Before I start the formal talk, I don't know if you guys can see my scarf here is white and purple. So trivia question, you can put the answer in the chat if you want. Does anybody know why I would be wearing a white and purple sash for today's talk? And you can put the answer in the chat, and I'm sure Anthony has grand prizes for us afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and share our screen and we will get started. So I believe a couple other members of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail Board are joining us today. I thank them for being here. I know I can't actually see who's here quite yet, but maybe afterwards. And I just want to acknowledge that they're here as well. In 1776, Abigail Adams wrote to her husband, John Adams, who was at the Continental Congress. She said, "Remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors." Most of us will admit in the following 200 years, there wasn't a lot being done to recognize women who helped shape Boston and beyond. That changed in 1989. When a group of Boston public school teachers, librarians, and their students inaugurated the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. And for the past 30 years, BWHT has worked to restore women to our rightful place in history and in the school curriculum here in Boston by documenting, sharing information about women who have made lasting contributions to the city of Boston. I'm currently the president of Boston Women's Heritage Trail, and we now have 13 walks throughout Boston on our website and in our guidebook. Our resources commemorate more than 200 Boston women who changed history in a wide variety of settings. We'll talk about a few of them today. We work as Boston Women's Heritage Trail, we work with the Boston Public Schools, we give guided walks, we teach classes to promote women's history. I don't know if you're aware of it, but today is International Women's Day, a global day celebrating the social, economic, and cultural and political achievements of women. And it seems fitting that we use this day of all days to learn a little bit more about just a few of Boston's important women.
We're about to go on several of the sites of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. The Boston Women's Heritage Trail began in 1989, and it features famous women from all the centuries, which is close to 4 centuries in Boston history. And so I want to introduce you to 3 pretty fabulous women. This is Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley lived in the Revolutionary era, and she was the first African-American to publish a book of poems. Now, what's really interesting about this whole group of women here is that historically women have been put on pedestals, and if a woman's on a pedestal, she can't get anything done. So the sculptor here, Meredith Bergman, has put each of these women working on her pedestal. This is Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams was the wife of John Adams, who was both vice president and president. She gave him a lot of advice, especially from a women's perspective, as to what to do as he was creating the Code of Laws and working during the American Revolution. This is Lucy Stone. She ran the Women's Journal, which was one of the most important women's newspapers for suffrage in the U.S. One thing that's cool about Lucy, cool about all this, is that kids come here, they sit here and they go, wow, I could be like Lucy Stone, I could be like Phyllis Wheatley, I could be like Abigail Adams, I could be a woman and change the world, I could be anyone and change the world. We are standing at 28 Commonwealth Ave, which was once the home of Amy Beach. Amy Beach was the first American woman to compose a symphony, the first one to have a piece performed by the Boston Symphony Orchestra and also by the Handel and Haydn Society. But from childhood, she was a musical prodigy. In 2000, a group of people lobbied to get her mentioned on the Hatch Shell on the Esplanade, because the Hatch Shell in the stonework has the names of 87 composers. So there are 87 men and Amy Beach on the Hatch Shell. We're in the public garden right now. We're in the stalls for the swan boats. The swan boats have been going around here since 1877. A lot of people assume that the city of Boston runs the swan boats, but the truth is the Paget family has been running this since the 1870s. Now, Robert gets all the credit. However, the fact is he died a year later in 1878, and his wife, Julia Paget, not knowing what else to do and needing a way to make a living for the family, took over and ran the swan boats for more than 3 decades after that until her death. We're in the public garden, and we are here with Mrs. Mallard and her ducklings, which is arguably the most popular statue in all of Boston. In 1941, Robert McCloskey wrote a book, Make Way for Ducklings, about Mrs. Mallard and her ducklings. And what happened was, on the 150th anniversary of the public garden in 1987, they decided that they wanted to have something to commemorate Mrs. Mallard and her ducklings. And so they employed a Newton-based artist named Nancy Schoen. We're about to go.
So let's take a few minutes to learn a little bit more about the women featured in the Boston Women's Memorial, which, if you want to visit, we hope you do. It's at the intersection of Commonwealth Avenue between Fairfield and Gloucester Streets. And mentioned in the video, the artist is Meredith Bergman. So Abigail Adams, our first woman. Abigail Adams was born in 1744 in Weymouth, and her father was a congregational minister. Her cousin was Dorothy Quincy, who was married to John Hancock. And Abigail was not formally educated, but she could read, she could write, and she could do arithmetic. And she was very well known as a critical thinker. She was an advocate of married women's property rights and more opportunities for women, particularly in the field of education. Abigail believed that women should not submit to laws made in their interest, nor should they be content, not made in their interest, and nor should they be content with the simple role of being a companion to their husband. She felt women should educate themselves and be recognized for their own intellectual capabilities so they could guide and influence the lives of their children and their husbands. She met John Adams in 1759 when she was just 15 years old. Her father approved of their relationship, but her mother was appalled because John Adams was just a country lawyer, and she didn't want that for her daughter. Of course, they married later in 1764, and they had 6 children. And a bit of trivia, Abigail Adams is one of only 2 women to have been married to a president and given birth to a president. And you can probably figure out the second one. Much of what we know about Abigail and John's presidency was because of their frequent correspondence. The Remember the Ladies letter was sent to John at the Continental Congress, as I mentioned, and he replied somewhat jokingly to her appeal, saying he expressed a fear of the despotism of the petticoat. Adams believed that slavery was evil and a threat to American democracy. A letter written by her on March 31st 1776, explained that she doubted most of the Virginians had such passion for liberty as they claimed they did, because they deprived their fellow creatures of freedom. She was so politically active. In fact, her political opponents came to refer to her as Mrs. President. They thought she was too outspoken, and she was well informed on issues facing her husband's administration. And sometimes she actually detailed current events not yet known to the public in letters to her sister, Mary, and to her son, John Quincy Adams. She was very much a staunch supporter of her husband's political career, and even planted favorable stories about her husband in the newspaper, which I think is pretty bad. Bad as in very good. She was the first lady to reside at the White House. She died just shy of 74 years old from typhoid fever. Our second woman from the Women's Memorial is Phillis Wheatley. She was the first published African-American poet. She was one of the best known poets in pre-19th century America. Wheatley was likely seized from Senegal or Gambia in West Africa when she was about 7 years old. When she was brought to the colonies, she was either too young or too frail for work in the South. So she was transported north on the ship, the Phyllis, and was purchased as a slave by the Wheatley family in Boston. The Wheatley family pretty quickly came to understand that she was very intelligent, and the Wheatley daughter and son were the ones who taught her to read and write. She published her first poem in 1770 in Boston. There's some thought that she possibly published an earlier poem in 1767 in Newport, Rhode Island, but there's not academic confirmation of that. So most people regard 1770 as her first publication. She then went to London in 1771 with the Wheatleys looking for a publisher, because the US publishers had refused to publish works by an African. In fact, colonists found it so difficult to believe that an African slave was writing such excellent poetry that Wheatley had to defend her authorship of her poetry in court in 1772. While she was in London, poems on various subjects, religious and moral, became the first volume of poetry published by an African American in modern times in 1773. She was a celebrity in London, and she had several royal patrons of her work. She had an even bigger following in England and in Europe than here at the time. And she likely wrote 145-ish poems. She was released from slavery by the Wheatley family late in 1773 after her book was published. And this was shortly before Mrs. Wheatley died in 1774. She stayed with the Wheatley family and maintained a relationship with them until 1778, when Mr. Wheatley and the Wheatley daughter died. And at that point in 1778, she basically lost all of her security and her livelihood. She married John Peters that year, even though many of her friends disapproved of the marriage. John Peters could read and write. He sometimes called himself a lawyer. He often worked as a grocer. He thought of himself as an entrepreneur. That wasn't really sustainable at this time for a Black man, because after the war, jobs were scarce and free Blacks were competing against white men for jobs. So, the one who's going to get the job is the white man. So Phyllis and John were often in extreme poverty, and Phyllis was often left to fend for herself when he would leave for months at a time. When she died in 1784, her husband was actually in jail because of debt, and her last surviving child died within a few days of her and was buried with her. The third woman in the Boston Women's Memorial is Lucy Stone, the well-known suffragist and abolitionist. She's the first Massachusetts woman to earn a college degree. Lucy Stone was born in West Brookfield, Massachusetts. She was one of 9 children. Her father was very domineering and didn't really see any reason that women should be educated, especially college educated. So at the age of 16, she worked as a teacher and saved all of her money so that she could attend college. Her father refused to pay for a girl to go to school. So in 1839, she spent a semester at Mount Holyoke, but was forced to return home because of a sister's illness. Also, Mount Holyoke wasn't really a fit for her because it was a very conservative school and she had very progressive views. So it wasn't a very good educational match for her. In 1843, she then attended Oberlin College in Ohio. And even as progressive as Oberlin was, Stone, at the time of her graduation, was given the honor of writing the commencement speech. However, even though she had a great interest in public speaking, she was not permitted to speak publicly and would not be permitted to give the commencement address. So she declined the honor of writing the speech that would be delivered by a man. And Lucy Stone is our first MIT connection. She was a tutor to Francis Amasa Walker, while his father, Amasa Walker, was on the faculty at Oberlin. Francis Amasa Walker, the son, was MIT's 3rd president from 1881 to 1897. So almost 30 years after Lucy, she was almost 30 years old when Lucy completed her education, and her career prospects were dim because very few professions were open to women at the time. However, renowned abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison hired her for his anti-slavery society. She wrote and delivered abolitionist speeches. She became active in women's rights. And like other female abolitionists, she was often heckled. And we know at least one occasion she was physically attacked by a mob. Nevertheless, she was so popular that soon she was out earning many of the male lecturers of the time. In 1850, 2 years after the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, Lucy Stone organized the first National Women's Rights Convention in Worcester. And a few years after that, she met Henry Blackwell, who was the brother of physicians Elizabeth and Emily Blackwell, the first 2 female physicians in the US. They were in New York. Henry convinced her to marry him by promising that they would create an egalitarian marriage. In fact, they wrote their wedding vows in 1855 with the intention to publish them. And they omitted the common reference to wifely obedience, and they included a protest against marital law. Lucy also set a new standard because she was the first woman in the US to keep her last name. So she did not take Henry Blackwell's name when they got married. In 1869, Stone split with the suffragists Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony over passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments. She was willing to accept voting rights for Black men, but not women, whereas Cady Stanton and Anthony were not willing to accept that. So she and her husband then in 1870 first published the Woman's Journal, which was a weekly suffragist periodical. The Women's Journal was active until 1917. And in fact, their daughter, Alice Stone Blackwell, was editor for the last 25 years of the publication. And this was a critically important publication during the suffragist period. In 1879, Lucy Stone registered to vote in Massachusetts because at that time, Massachusetts allowed women to vote in some local elections. However, her name was removed from the voter lists because she did not use her husband's surname. So a little bit of a problem there. Julia Ward Howe is best known as the author of The Battle Hymn of the Republic. She also co-founded the American Women's Suffrage Association. Howe was a writer, a lecturer, an abolitionist, a suffragist. She was the daughter of a wealthy New York banker and was a direct descendant of Roger Williams, who founded Rhode Island, the Rhode Island colony, in 1636. She met her husband, Dr. Samuel Howe, when she was touring New England and was visiting the New England Institute for the Blind. She happened to be with her friend, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, on this tour. Dr. Samuel Howe was about 20 years older than Julia, but she was smitten. Age didn't matter. They married quickly. They had 6 children. Her husband liked her ideals, but he did not like the public acclaim she was getting, particularly for her poetry. He really believed that the woman's place was in the home, supporting her husband, and that she should not have this public-facing position. He was controlling, sometimes violent, and he mismanaged the money that she inherited from her father. She stayed in the marriage because he threatened to keep the children from her if she divorced him. So she studied languages, she studied philosophy at home, she supported his causes, and again began writing, particularly for abolitionist publications, and getting more involved in public life. He wasn't happy about this, but at least she was supporting his causes, so he tolerated it. There's some evidence that he, Dr. Howe, was part of the Secret Six who bankrolled John Brown at Harper's Ferry. Not confirmed, but there's some evidence that suggests that he was part of that. As a result of her and her husband's work with the Sanitary Commission, they were invited to Washington by President Lincoln. And at the time of their visit to the president, they visited a Union camp and they heard men singing John Brown's Body. It was a very common song at the time. The clergyman who was in charge of the camp asked her to write a new song for the war effort. So she wrote the poem Battle Hymn of the Republic, which was published in 1862 in the Atlantic Monthly. She was very active in women's rights later in her life. She served a prominent role in several suffrage organizations. She worked with Lucy Stone. She helped found the Women's Journal. She was an editor. She was a writer for it. And she was very active in women's clubs at the time. After the Civil War, she tried to get a formal Mother's Day, what she called the Mother's Day for Peace, as a national holiday. She was opposed to war in all forms. She wasn't successful in getting Mother's Day passed at that time. However, we can thank her for celebrating Mother's Day, which was first celebrated then in West Virginia in 1907. Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler was the first African-American female doctor. She received her Doctorate of Medicine in 1864 from the New England Female Medical College, later known as the Boston University School of Medicine. After receiving her medical degree, she moved to Richmond, Virginia to care for freed slaves after the Civil War. She then returned to Boston in the late 1860s and focused on women and children and emphasized nutrition and preventative medicine. She published the book you see here, A Book of Medical Discourses in 2 parts in 1883, which is considered the first medical publication by an African American. You'll notice that I don't have a picture of her as I do the other women because there are no known pictures of Dr. Crumpler. Our second MIT connection, Ellen Swallow Richards. Ellen Swallow Richards started at Vassar Female College in 1868. Of course, Vassar was exclusively for women at the time. They didn't go coeducational until 1969. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in 1870. She was trained as a chemist, and after her graduation applied for jobs as a chemist, but was turned down for every job that she applied for. She then applied to MIT, and she was admitted to MIT in 1870 as a special student. She was the first woman to study at MIT. She was awarded a BS in chemistry in 1873 and simultaneously was awarded her master's degree in chemistry from Vassar. In 1875, she earned the doctorate at MIT, but the board at the time refused to award it because MIT didn't want the first doctorate in chemistry to be awarded to a woman. The first doctorate at MIT didn't go to a woman until 1886. Ellen Swallow Richards established a women's laboratory at MIT in 1875 because remember, at this time, women were still only admitted as special students. When women were admitted as to regular courses, she closed down the lab and established the Cheney Reading Room for Women, which was named after her student, Margaret Swan Cheney, daughter of writer, reformer, philanthropist Edna Dow Lily Hale Cheney. Ellen Swallow Richards continued to teach at MIT until she was unpaid until 1884. She continued to do research in sanitary chemistry and in engineering. She is said to have coined the term ecology because she studied air, water, and food. She pioneered the field of sanitary engineering and home economics. In 1887, she conducted research that led to the first state water quality standards in the nation. And she also, led to the development of the first modern municipal sewage treatment plant, which was in Lowell. From 1887 to 1897, Richards served as an official water analyst for the state of Massachusetts Board of Health, and she continued as an instructor at MIT, and she continued in the role at MIT until her death. She was very concerned about applying scientific principles to domestic topics, such as good nutrition, proper clothing, physical fitness, eating healthy foods, sanitation, and what she called efficient practices, anything that would allow women more time for pursuits other than cooking and cleaning. She was awarded an honorary PhD from Smith College in 1910. Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin was the founder of the Women's Era Club in 1893. The Women's Era Club had two purposes. One, to offer its members opportunities for self-improvement, and two, to address issues that directly affected the African-American community, from local politics to education to discrimination and the terrorism of Black Americans in the South. It was part of the larger women's club movement at the time. Suffrage was not a primary goal of the club, but members of the club were actively engaged in the suffrage movement. She was publisher of the Women's Era newspaper, the first national newspaper by and for Black women. She quickly became nationally recognized as the voice of Black women. Her daughter, Florida Ruffin Ridley, was also active in the New Era Club and the newspaper, and was in fact the second African-American school teacher in the Boston Public Schools. Josephine organized a national conference in 1895 to form the National Federation of Afro-American Women, which later merged with the Colored Women's League to form the National Association of Colored Women in 1896. The National Association of Colored Women was one of the women's clubs at the time, was accepted by Massachusetts State Federation of Women's Clubs and was known as the New Women's Era Club, but it was refused national membership in 1900 because there was a fear that they might offend Southern members. Southern clubs, if you will. She supported the local suffrage movement. She joined and accepted leadership positions in local and national suffrage organizations, many of which were dominated by white women. She worked closely with Lucy Stone and Julia Ward Howe. And her husband, George, was Boston's first African-American municipal judge. Amy Cheney Beach began her career as a concert pianist. She started composing only after she got married. Her husband was a surgeon and was almost 25 years older than Amy, and he placed restrictions on her performing. She was basically a self-taught composer because her husband wouldn't let her take classes or have a tutor. So she learned composing on her own. Her Mass in E flat major was the first work by a woman to be performed by the Handel and Haydn Society with the Boston Symphony Orchestra in 1892. And later that year, she was the first woman to have an aria performed by the New York Symphony Orchestra. In 1896, the Gaelic Symphony, which we just listened to, was the first symphony composed and published by an American woman. In 1900, she premiered her own piano concerto with the Boston Symphony Orchestra and later performed it in Europe. Jenny Loitman-Baron was one of 4 daughters of Russian immigrant parents. She grew up in Boston's West End to a family that didn't have much material wealth, but her mother believed very strongly that education and learning was very, very important, and particularly supportive of women's education. Jenny Loitman-Baron graduated as valedictorian from Girls High School in Boston at the age of 15, and she went straight to college from there. She sold books door to door, and she taught Americanization classes at night while studying at BU. She earned a 4-year degree from Boston University in only 3 years and was awarded her law degree just 2 years after that. While she was at BU, she organized the Boston University Equal Suffrage League. In 1914, she received her Master of Law from BU, one of very few women to earn such a high degree. And she opened her own law practice in 1914. In 1918, she married her childhood sweetheart, Samuel Barron, and they opened a joint practice, which they continued and held until 1934. In 1924, Loitman-Baron became the first woman on the Boston School Committee. In 1934, she was appointed Assistant Attorney General of Massachusetts, becoming the first woman to try a major criminal case in the state, which coincides with the time they had to close down their joint law practice because she was a Assistant Attorney General for the state. She became Massachusetts' first full-time woman judge in 1937. She served for 30 years. For 20 years, she was in the Boston Municipal Court. And then in 1957, she was the first woman appointed to the Massachusetts Superior Court, where she served for 10 years. In 1950, she represented the League of Women Voters and won the right for women to serve on juries. She served on the bench until just a week before her death at the age of 77. Melnia Cass is known as the First Lady of Roxbury. She was a community and civil rights activist. She was active in desegregating the Boston public schools. She assisted women with voter registration after the 19th Amendment passed. So when you hear people talk about the intersection of Mass and Cass, Melnia Cass is who we're talking about. She was a pioneer in the daycare movement. She worked to open employment opportunities for African Americans, particularly in stores and in hospitals. She helped found Freedom House with Muriel Snowden. Freedom House, of course, is a nonprofit community-based organization dedicated to human rights and advocacy for African Americans in Boston. Melnia Cass focused on urban renewal, minority employment, educational equality for children. She was president of the Boston NAACP. And in 1966, on May 22nd, Mayor John Collins declared the first Melnia Cass Day in Boston in honor of her 70th birthday. And it's been celebrated since then. In 1977, Mayor Kevin White hosted an event honoring 7 grand Bostonians, and Melnia Cass was one of them. The Boston YWCA on Clarendon Street is named for her, and she received honorary doctorates from Northeastern University, Simmons College, and Boston College. Ruby Fu is from our newest trail. When you have a chance to look at the Boston Women's Heritage Trail website, you'll see our newest trail, which is Women Feeding Boston. Ruby Fu moved to Boston in 1923, where she began a single-room restaurant in Boston's Chinatown. Its popularity quickly grew, and she opened Ruby Fu's Den on Hudson Street in 1929. Ruby Fu's Den was heralded as the first Chinese restaurant to successfully cater to non-Chinese clientele. Throughout World War II, the Den was a legendary meeting place for sports figures, for theater actors and figures, and for other celebrities at the time. She opened similar restaurants in New York, in Miami, in Washington, in Providence. She became a nationally known restaurateur and was a mentor to dozens of chefs in Boston. In 1938, the newspapers ran a photo of a Chinese baby sitting amidst rubble in Shanghai at a railroad station that the Japanese had bombed. Ruby Fu had that child brought to the United States, where she adopted him and raised him along with her other children. Ruth Batson, a civil rights activist, chairperson of the Education Committee of the Boston NAACP that led the fight in the early 1960s against segregation in Boston public schools. She was the founder and later director of the METCO Voluntary Desegregation Program. Ruth Batson was the first Black woman on the Democratic National Committee and the first woman elected president of the NAACP's New England Regional Conference. She earned her Master's of Education at BU in 1976 and served in several roles at Boston University throughout her life. She was director of the Consultation and Education Program. She was director of the School Desegregation Research Project, and she was a coordinator of the Clinical Task Force and associate professor at the School of Medicine in the Division of Psychiatry. And last but not least is Kip Tiernan. Kip Tiernan was an activist for social and economic justice. She advocated, protested, lobbied for affordable and accessible housing, for healthcare, for education, for jobs, for civil rights, and for peace. She's probably most well known because in 1974, she founded Rosie's Place, which is America's first shelter for homeless women, founded in an abandoned supermarket. Kip Tiernan was an avid writer. She was involved in the civil rights and anti-war movements. She and her advocacy partner founded or helped found a wide range of community organizations to address the needs of people, especially the homeless and the hungry, including the Boston Food Bank, the Poor People's United Fund, Phoenix House, the Boston Women's Fund, and Transition House. She was also one of the founders of Victory House in the South End of Boston, which is a residential alcohol treatment program for homeless alcoholic men. Thank you so much for joining me today. You can find much more information on our website at bwht.org. You can purchase our guidebook. You also have access to all of our walks on the website. If you're on your phone and you're walking around Boston, you can follow the walks from your phone. You can also make a donation to continue our work. Our latest project is adding voice to our Boston women. So we're doing a Talking Statues project where the women of the Boston Women's Memorial will actually tell their own story. I'm going to stop my share and take a few questions, but not hard ones.
Thank you so much for that talk. That was wonderful. And it was great to hear so many different voices that have had a hand in Boston's history. We don't have any questions in the chat yet, if you can believe it, but we do have a couple of guesses as to why you're wearing a purple and white scarf.
Okay.
Lydia and Michelle both said, were they white and purple suffragette colors by any chance?
Yes, they were. Yeah. The women in the United States wore white sashes with a white and purple sashes with a yellow, either a yellow rose or a yellow bird on their sash. So the next time your sweetheart wants to give you roses, tell them you want yellow and not red, because the red roses were the ones carried by the opposition to women's voting rights, right? That's what they carried. They carried the red roses. The yellow roses were the supporters of women's suffrage.
Yeah, not very romantic at all, the red roses.
That's right. The red roses, not very romantic. So you want the yellow roses.
Okay, well, if anybody has any questions, we'll give you just a couple moments to drop them in chat before we end the recording. And feel free to stick around if you want to ask a question over mic and turn on your cameras. Once the recording's over, we'll have a couple of moments for that. But I'm not seeing anything come in through the chat. So I just want to thank you again. This was such a great talk to be able to share with our MyTech friends and to be able to put up on YouTube later for everybody to see. Clara asks a question. Any plans to add Spanish-speaking women to the lineup of the Talking Statues project?
Yes, actually. We are having the Talking Statues project will be in Spanish and in English. And the way that this works is that it'll work through a QR code. You'll go up to the statue and there'll be a QR code at the statue, and you can use your smartphone to access the recording. And we're actually having local well-known, I don't know that I can release the names yet, but you would recognize the well-known speakers when you hear their voices on the Talking Statues. And I see a follow-up question, Hispanic women from Boston history, most definitely. We have many of them in our guidebooks and on our talks, and definitely are part of our organization.
Excellent. And we got a thank you from Chris Karam for this talk. Learned and enjoyed it tremendously. Happy International Women's Day to all. A lot of thank yous coming in. So thank you once again from MyTech.